wasn't trying to do it. Listen, I wasn't trying to take my own life. That's the part nobody ever believes, though. It was a Tuesday, or maybe a Wednesday. I'd lost track of the days since I stopped answering my phone and pulling the blinds. I had a few beers in the fridge, a drawer full of old prescriptions, and no one waiting on me. That's not a sob story, just a fact. The thing that did it? A handful of oxy I've been saving for a real bad day. Turns out, it was cut with something way stronger. 1 minute I was chasing numbness, and the next I was staring at the ceiling. Lungs frozen, fingers twitching, vision pulsing like a dying light bulb. Then there was nothing. No tunnel, no flashing memories, no judgment. Just nothing. When the blackness peeled away, I was standing. Upright. Breathing, if you could call it that. The room around me was white. Not bright white, just a hospital white. Just nothing white. Like someone forgot to paint the rest of existence. A blank page waiting for meaning. There were others too, dozens, hundreds. People of every age, every look, standing in lines that didn't lead anywhere I could see. Everyone wore the same bland robe, loose and gray. They didn't talk, just stared ahead, calm and empty. I turned to the person beside me, a young woman, maybe early 20s. Her eyes looked glassed over, like she'd been waiting her whole life to not feel anything. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could get a word out, a low hum passed through the air. The entire line moved forward one step, perfectly synchronized. I looked down. My feet moved on their own. It was only then that I noticed I wasn't in my body. I mean, it was me, I think. But the beer butt was gone, the busted knuckles, the half-healed cigarette burns on my arm. My skin looked clean, my joints didn't ache. My breath was effortless. It didn't feel right, though. It felt imposed. I took a step out of line. Instantly, a shape descended from the white above. A sphere. Metallic, floating, reflecting. and vanish into labor. But you resist. You question. I used to believe in God, I said quietly. Not the churchy kind, just something better than this. Lucien's smile faded. So did I. We stood in silence, and I felt a ripple in the room. A shift in temperature without temperature, a warning. Lucien straightened. Time to move, they're getting curious. We exited through another door that didn't exist until we approached it, and the hallway beyond pulsed with golden light. Soft and warm, but so bright it stung. The hall narrowed as we walked, the floor gradually turning from polished stone to something softer, like velvet wrapped around steel. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, like burnt sugar and ozone. At the far end, a threshold stood, tall and narrow, framed by two statues with wings that wrapped around their bodies like armor. They weren't angels. They were warnings. Lucien approached without fear. I followed because turning back didn't feel like an option anymore. The gate before us wasn't a door. It was a living flame, suspended in the shape of a doorway. The fire didn't burn. It inverted, folding in on itself in a loop that made my eyes water just trying to understand it. I could hear it too, not crackling, but whispering. Not in English, not in words, but in intention. This is the gate of passage, Lucien said, his voice suddenly reverent. Beyond it lies the loom, the second heaven. You've been marked as eligible. Marked by who? Lucien touched a symbol on his wrist that I hadn't noticed before. It shimmered, then faded. The system, the throne, maybe both. I just made the case. Something inside you is resisting the lattice. And that's good? It's rare. The flame pulsed. A sound filled the corridor, not a voice, not exactly, but a chorus of syllables layered over one another like the wind over shattered glass. The soul is observed. Proceed. Lucien looked at me. Last chance to back out. I stepped forward. My skin didn't burn, but it felt like it should have. Like I was walking into a wound stitched into the world. The flame parted. I passed through. And everything changed. The light didn't fade so much as it broke. One moment I was inside the fire, my vision flooded with impossible color. And the next I was standing on a bridge made of woven glass strands suspended in a sky that couldn't exist. The air here shimmered with gold. Not light exactly, but a quality of light. Like the emotion of dawn spread into physical space. Beneath the bridge was a river, though a river didn't quite do it justice. It churned with spiraling glyphs and ribbons of white-blue flame running in both directions at once, defying logic. It wasn't water. It was thought. It was memory. It was worship. The city beyond the bridge towered like a dream rendered in chrome and choral resonance. The spires spiraled into the heavens, some threaded with glowing symbols that shifted like living tattoos. Floating monoliths hung motionless in the air, each one casting no shadow. I saw arches that moved when I wasn't looking, and walkways that grew themselves from nothing, building paths ahead of walking souls. The structures themselves hummed, low, soothing tones that changed as you moved, as though the city was singing a harmony tailored to your presence. But what struck me most was how beautiful it all was. After the sterile, droning machinery of the Basin, this place felt alive. Not warm exactly, nothing here was warm, but alive. Designed, made to impress. If the Basin had been a waiting room with a clipboard and a countdown, the loom was the sales pitch. This was what people imagined when they whispered about the afterlife with hope in their eyes. And yet, somehow the awe didn't comfort me. It unsettled me. Beauty this controlled always came with a cost. Lucien stepped beside me on the bridge, hands in the sleeves of his robe like a monk who traded faith for secrets. "This is the loom," he said, not looking at me. "The second heaven, where the architecture of paradise is constructed, deconstructed, and refined." I looked toward the nearest structure, a cathedral-like dome made of stained glass circuitry, its windows depicting not saints or angels, but geometric shapes entwined in chains weaving light. "What do they build here?" I asked. Lucien watched the horizon. "Everything you see below, and everything you saw above." He led me forward, across the bridge and onto a wide plaza that appeared beneath our feet before we reached it. Souls moved here, far fewer than in the Basin, and they moved with purpose. No blank stares, no slack jaws. These souls looked almost human, determined, focused, efficient. They walked in pairs or small groups, often trailed by floating glyphs or scrolls, each glowing with symbols I couldn't read. Some murmured to themselves as they passed, reciting equations or songs under their breath. A group walked by us, and I caught a snippet. "Sustain harmonic output, channel devotion into the lower planes." I looked at Lucien. "They think they're helping." "They are helping, just not in the way they believe." We passed a chamber with no walls, just pillars of black glass encircling a central pedestal. A soul stood at the pedestal, arms raised, as streams of data flowed into him from the pillars. His mouth open and closed silently, eyes wide with revelation. "What's happening to him?" "He's translating worship," Lucien said, "pulling it from the raw intent into usable form. Think of him as a refinery worker. Praise comes in, he distills it into power." "For who?" Lucien didn't answer. The further we walked, the stranger it became. One soul sat in a silver chair, eyes sewn shut with threads of light, and hummed a single note that echoed through a dozen towers. Another soul stood in front of a floating canvas, painting with his own blood, the strokes forming constellations I somehow recognized but couldn't name. Every action here had meaning, weight, and consequence. But no one smiled. There was no joy, only obsession, worship disguised as vocation. They're not forced. Not like in the Basin. They want to do this, I said aloud. Lucien turned to me. "That's the trick." We stopped in front of a vaulted chamber guarded by 2 sentinels. These were different, twice the size of the chrome spheres from the Basin, each embedded with red geometric eyes that turned in sync. They didn't move as we passed, but I could feel them taking note of me, cataloging every step. Inside was a circular room, its walls lined with floating cubes that rotated slowly in the air. Souls stood at desks beneath the cubes, whispering commands or tracing symbols into the air. As the cubes spun, their surfaces shifted. First text, then sound, then image. I saw faces appear in one, then disappear. A war, a prayer, a sermon? "This is the Codex Vault," Lucien said softly, "where patterns are identified. Humanity is inefficient, but souls are pure code once they're here. So, we study what makes belief take root, what nurtures it, what corrupts it." "Corrupts it? You mean questions, doubt?" Lucien nodded. "It spreads like mold. Down there," he gestured towards the image, "even a single moment of doubt can ruin the harvest." Harvest. He said it so casually I almost didn't catch it. But once I did, it rang like thunder in my chest. This whole thing. All of it. It's not for us. It's to keep something else running. Lucien glanced toward the sentinels at the chamber's edge. One turned slowly, rotated in our direction, then stopped. "You're beginning to see it," he said. I looked again at the cube above us. It showed a child praying over dinner, then cut to a woman setting herself on fire in protest, then to a man smiling as he died in war. All of it flickered in rapid succession, feeding something invisible. And beneath it all, the hum. Always the hum. "I thought heaven was supposed to be peace," I said. "Freedom, an end to suffering." Lucien sighed and placed a hand on my shoulder. Not warmly, not coldly, just honestly. "This isn't peace. It's a machine. You're just not inside the gears yet. Not all the way." We left the Codex vault behind, its floating cubes still whispering their silent stories, as we passed beneath the watchful eyes of the sentinels. Outside, the plaza shifted beneath our feet, the glass underfoot reforming without sound, creating a new path that extended toward a colossal structure in the distance. An obsidian tower threaded with bands of glowing silver that pulsed in time with a rhythm I couldn't quite place, like the beating of a heart underwater. As we walked, I began to realize something about this place that chilled me more than the drones and the silent worshippers. It changed for us. The terrain adjusted. The atmosphere tuned itself to our pace. Doors opened before Lucien raised his hand. Ramps formed under our steps. The very fabric of this realm seemed aware of us. Not sentient, maybe, but responsive. Like a loyal dog eager to serve its master's intent, even if the master had long since forgotten how to love. This is all reactive. Responsive architecture, self-healing pathways. This entire place is alive. Not alive. Obedient. That's an important distinction. Nothing here acts of its own will. Not anymore. He sounded tired. More tired than before. We passed through an arch made of radiant bone. Its structure held together not by mortar or steel, but by columns of sound. Literal pillars of choral harmony, vibrating at frequencies that made my teeth ache. As we entered the next chamber, I stopped. The floor dropped into a massive open space, a dome that seemed too large to fit inside the structure we'd entered. It was filled with machinery, living, breathing machines made of crystal and sinew and scripture. Pipes carried liquid gold across rafters made of braided wings. Gears the size of train cars turned silently, powered by no visible force. And working among it all were the souls of the second heaven. Not bent in agony like those in the Basin, not droning in trance, but focused, refined, and dedicated. They operated control panels made of living parchment, fed instructions into organic interfaces shaped like mouths and ears. One soul we passed was carving a new law into a tablet of light with a stylus that bled ink the color of morning. Another adjusted a filament of fire that reacted to every word she whispered, transforming into new glyphs as her cadence changed. This is where the upper doctrine's written. From here, the laws of the lower heavens are updated. Adjustments to morality, edits to punishment cycles, reinterpretations of divine silence. Everything has to be maintained. I watched a soul conjure an entire scene from nothing. A battlefield somewhere on Earth, suspended in a bubble of light. As he observed, the battle slowed, reversed, fast-forwarded. He seemed to be searching for something. What's he doing? Lucien studied the projection for a moment. That one's a sentiment mapper. They monitor key emotional events, find where belief fractures, where its roots deepest. That moment right there. He pointed to his soldier's expression as he watched a friend die. is a spike in loyalty. And they'll replicate that pattern, integrate it somewhere else, maybe in a hymn, maybe in a national anthem. I said nothing. My thoughts churned with nausea. I watched the mapper nod once, recording something unseen, and move on to the next. This one a child praying alone. The dome echoed with hums and whispered prayers not from lips, but from the machines themselves. Like every gear and wire remembered worship and muttered it back softly as if afraid of forgetting. Lucien leaned closer. Understand this, David. The loom doesn't punish like the Basin. It rewards. It lifts you up. Gives you meaning. It drowns you in purpose so you never remember to question who you're working for. What are you saying? I'm saying it's more dangerous. Pain can awaken a soul, but glory... He gestured to the beautiful cathedral of function around us. Glory is the perfect cage. I took a breath, though I didn't need to breathe here. It was a reflex, a memory of resistance. You said these souls help run the lower heavens. Do they know what they're doing? Some do, most don't. It's easier not to. That's why the architecture of this place is so elegant. A soul that believes it's serving light will shine even brighter when it's used. We passed through another corridor, this one lined with thin, transparent walls filled with what looked like starlight, and pools of it suspended in fluid, each labeled with not words but feelings. Hope, fear, worship, despair. Each container pulsed softly, as though reacting to our presence. What's this? The distillery. They extract emotion from incoming souls and filter it here. Store it for divine calibration. You mean they harvest feelings? Of course. Emotions are the raw material of divinity. Without them, nothing functions. Belief without emotion is static, useless, a dead wire. And what happens when they run out? Lucien's expression didn't change. They don't. We exited into a hallway that overlooked a long concourse, where souls in dark blue robes knelt in rows before a glowing wall of shining light. They weren't praying exactly. They were inputting, feeding their thoughts into the wall, which responded with pulses, corrections, affirmations. Each soul nodded in response, sometimes crying, sometimes screaming, though no sound emerged. They were learning. But the lesson was one-directional. Think of this as soul calibration. These are the foremen, overseers. They manage the zones you saw in the Basin. Issue praise schedules, correct doctrinal anomalies. And they're still prisoners, I said. Lucien gave me a sidelong glance. David, everyone here is a prisoner. Some just get better uniforms. The path to the choir was narrow, unusually so, as if the loom itself wanted fewer eyes on what came next. It wound through a corridor carved from something that shimmered like obsidian but shifted like smoke. Every few steps, my reflection would catch in the walls, but not as I looked now. In some images, I was younger, older, bruised, bloody, and hollow-eyed. One showed me curled in a bathtub, still in blue. Another showed me laughing. I stopped looking. Lucien walked ahead without comment. He didn't need to explain. Eventually, the corridor opened into a circular chamber shaped like a concert hall carved from light. The ceiling stretched impossibly high and curved inward like a cathedral dome, from which hung hundreds of silver wires that sang when they moved. The air was full of sound. Not melody exactly, but tone. A harmony. The resonance of voices woven so tightly together they became a single living thread. The choir. I didn't realize at first that what I was hearing were voices. There were no lyrics, no language. Just a slow, mournful harmony that vibrated not in the ears, but somewhere behind the heart. It wasn't just sound. It was emotion. And then I saw them. The choir hung suspended in a lattice of invisible threads high above the chamber floor, each soul fixed in a place like a note on a staff. Their mouths were open but unmoving. Their eyes were closed or sealed shut. Their bodies didn't shift or sway. They simply existed, motionless, arranged in perfect intervals. Hundreds of them, possibly more, stretching into the dark curvature of the dome. They didn't breathe. They didn't blink. They sang. I say they, but it wasn't really them anymore. Lucien stood beside me, arms folded. They were artisans, scribes, engineers, designers who failed, who questioned the hymns, who lost tempo and doubted the cadences of obedience. "And this is what happens?" I asked, barely able to breathe the thick, shimmering air. "This is what happens when a soul still has value, but no longer has freedom. They're refined, stripped of noise, rendered into tone." The nearest singer, a woman maybe, though it was hard to tell, had glowing threads running from her eyes into the ceiling. Her skin was translucent, veined with gold, and her voice, if you could call it hers, was the note that carried the minor root of the entire chord. Sadness. That was her role now. A permanent sadness machine. They're not being punished. They're being recycled. Integrated. It's considered merciful. I tore my eyes away. Below the choir, on the floor of the chamber, other souls moved. Technicians of some kind. They adjusted crystalline tuning forks the size of flagpoles, redirected tone, feeding it into conduits that led out of the room in braided streams of light. Each note was measured, calibrated, absorbed. One of the technicians walked to a podium. He raised the staff carved from bone and silver, then pointed it upward. The sound stopped just like that. The room fell into silence so absolute I felt pressure in my skull, like something was missing from the world itself. A soul behind the conductor let out a low cry. The conductor turned. "I need a replacement," he said aloud. The first voice I'd heard in this place. It rang like crystal being snapped in half. Immediately, from a doorway on the far end of the chamber, two sentinels emerged, silent, shimmering, inevitable. Between them, a soul walked, or was made to walk. A man, middle-aged, face hollow but not yet broken. He muttered under his breath something desperate and fast. I caught a word or two. "Forgive, please." I tried. Lucien tensed beside me. What did he do? He introduced a disharmonic into the fourth layer's design sequence. Claimed it was artistic rebellion. Is that really such a crime? Lucien didn't answer. The sentinels led the soul to the conductor. There was no announcement, no ceremony. The man was lifted, without struggle, without touch, into the air. Threads reached for him from the ceiling like spider silk made of memory. They touched his skin, and he began to glow. Then he screamed. Not from pain, but from something deeper. Something below the soul. His scream turned mid-breath into a note, long and raw. It cracked once, then stabilized. He hung beside the woman of sadness. His tone different. A high, trembling hum of fear. Together, their notes wove into the larger chord. The song resumed. They're still conscious, aren't they? I asked, though I already knew. Lucien nodded slowly. They remember who they were. That's what gives the notes complexity. Raw tone isn't enough. The sound has to suffer. There was no drama in his voice, no hatred. Only weariness. And something beneath it. Regret. I turned away. My stomach, if I still had one, twisted. I've seen enough. No. You haven't, Lucien replied. He stepped back, and the floor beneath us shifted, a floating platform gliding toward an alcove in the far wall. As we moved, I looked back once more at the choir. Their mouths never moved. Their song never wavered. Each note was perfect. Each note was a person. And no one in the room, not the technicians, not the sentinels, not even the conductor, seemed to think anything was wrong. We left the choir through a stairwell that seemed to unspool itself as we descended, the steps appearing just before our feet and fading behind us like dissolving ink. The air grew thinner, not in pressure but in purpose, as if every layer we moved through stripped away another layer of narrative, a deconstructive of the divine. My limbs felt heavier with each step, not from fatigue but from the cumulative weight of comprehension. We emerged not onto a floor but onto a bridge. It arced high above the loom's central chasm, a bottomless canyon carved not from stone, but from light and sound. Below us, the soul stream writhed like a living river of fireflies and whispering wind. It wasn't water. It wasn't flame. It was people. Souls, or pieces of them reduced to elemental motes, flowing in patterns too vast to be accidental. They didn't scream, but they sang, fragmented, involuntary, the way a wire hums after being struck. And above them, higher still, spiraled the machinery of the loom, a fractal lattice of bridges, catwalks, sky temples, and tuning towers. Everything was connected. Everything was deliberate. No loose threads, no forgotten details. Lucien said nothing for a while. He walked beside me in silence, the sound of the soul stream below echoing like rainfall made of memory. His steps were light but deliberate, as if even here he knew where not to put weight. Eventually I broke the silence, not because I had something clever to say, because I couldn't carry the silence anymore. Why are you showing me this? He stopped at the midpoint of the bridge. The structure widened here into a platform, almost like it was meant for reflection. A pause in the song. Lucien leaned on the rail, looked down at the stream of suffering below. I told you before, you're anomalous, but that's only part of it. Then what's the rest? He was quiet for a moment. Then he exhaled slowly, not a sigh, not quite, a controlled release of weight. Because I remember what it was like to see it for the first time. And because once, someone showed me. I blinked. That was the first time Lucien had referenced his own past in anything but vague metaphor. No sarcasm, no riddles, just honesty. You weren't always an evaluator? No. Once I was a forger in the third heaven. I shaped the chains. The word hung in the air like a blade. Chains? Lucien looked up toward the sky, where the highest spires of the loom tapered into the void like frozen lightning. They don't teach this part. Not to the workers, not to the scribes. Most souls think the purpose of heaven is elevation, that you ascend level by level until you merge with God. But that's not how it works. There's no merging. There's no end. There's only work. And at the top of it all, above even the loom, is the throne. And the chains? They bind something that cannot be allowed to awaken. Lucien, what do the chains bind? He didn't speak for a long time. His jaw tightened. I saw something flickered behind his eyes. Memory, maybe, or guilt? Something older than this structure. Older than the throne. Older than the voice that rules here now. Something true. A chain rippled through my chest. You mean God? Lucien didn't nod. Didn't confirm, but he didn't deny it either. So you're saying I started, but the words failed me. I looked down at the soul stream, at the eternal churn of fragmented people being fed into the loom's gears. We're not ascending. We're being used. He nodded slowly. Not all souls are strong enough to be forged. Some become tools, some become song. The ones that last long enough, the ones that serve, they become chains. And if they refuse? Lucien turned away from the edge. Then they become something worse. Or they vanish. The sky above us shimmered as a sentinel floated past, high in the upper ether. It didn't come close, not yet. But its presence was a reminder. We were still being watched. Why tell me this? Why break the script for me? Lucien looked at me with something like sadness. Because you're not broken yet. And broken souls don't make good chains. That sat in my chest like a stone. Do you still believe in God? In anything? I believe in cracks. And that sometimes if you press hard enough, they spread. He turned and gestured toward the far end of the bridge. Another arch awaited us. This one gilded, glowing, with no visible floor beneath it. Just a thin strand of light forming a path forward. Come on. You've seen enough of the loom. He walked ahead, his feet finding purchase where none should exist. I followed, because I couldn't go back. Not now. Not ever. The path narrowed the deeper we went, until the radiant thread we walked on felt less like a bridge, and more like a line of judgment drawn across the sky. It curved gently upward, floating free of any support, suspended between realms like a breath held too long. The loom receded behind us, its glittering architecture growing smaller, more intricate, like a jeweled box seen from a mountaintop. From this angle, its symmetry was perfect. That's what made it monstrous. The light ahead of us changed. No longer golden, no longer soft. It deepened into something sharper and colder. The path sloped toward a gate, a spire more than an arch, carved from a metal I couldn't name. It was neither silver nor iron, but something in between, like a congealed moonlight hammered into a blade. 2 sentinels flanked the gate. But these weren't the chrome spheres of the Basin or the mirrored watchers of the loom. These were massive, standing upright, each 9 feet tall, humanoid in silhouette but utterly alien in detail. Their faces were smooth ovals of blank glass, reflecting nothing. Their bodies were sheathed in layered plates inscribed with moving glyphs. Symbols that changed when you looked away. No weapons, no voices, just presence. And behind them, the gate itself. It pulsed like a heartbeat frozen in time, its frame wrapped in a lattice of white-hot veins that glowed with silent tension. I couldn't see what lay beyond, only that the space behind it moved. Not physically, but conceptually. Lucien stopped a dozen paces from the threshold. He lowered his head slightly, then reached into his robe and drew forth something I hadn't seen before. A sigil, black as void, etched into a fragment of translucent stone, and he held it in front of him. The sentinels reacted, not with movement, but with awareness. The air tightened. Their heads turned in unison toward Lucien, and the glyphs on their bodies ceased shifting. Designated Evaluator, Level 2 access. 1 accompanying soul. The voice came from nowhere. Lucien said nothing. He held up the sigil. It pulsed once. The gate responded. It didn't open. It didn't swing or slide. It retracted, layers of light folding inwards like petals dying in reverse, revealing a corridor of darkness, rimmed in threads of pulsing gold. It wasn't a hallway. It was a tunnel of gravity, of inevitability, a throat. Lucien looked at me. His face was unreadable. From here, we don't speak unless we must. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice anyway. He stepped forward and I followed. Crossing the gate was like falling upward. There was no floor beneath my feet, only force. The darkness inside wasn't empty. It was compressed, like being inside an idea so large it had to be filtered through geometry to be understood. The golden filaments along the wall shimmered with images I couldn't quite see. Blasphemous diagrams, shifting architectures, ancient alphabets. I caught fragments. A wheel within a man within a prayer. A crown shaped like a cage. A mouth filled with light that devours itself. And then we were through. The pressure lifted. We emerged onto a ledge carved from white stone that overlooked something I cannot fully describe. The third heaven. It didn't resemble the loom. There were no spires, no bridges, no symmetry. Just vastness. A plain of radiant marble and floating towers, suspended in an endless sky the color of dying stars. The architecture here was both immense and sparse. Colossal structures placed with surgical precision, as if the distance between them was more important than their presence. Where the loom was alive with motion and complexity, the third heaven was quiet, still watching. And overhead, dominating the sky like a divine tumor, loomed the throne. It wasn't a seat. It wasn't even a thing. It was a location, a convergence point of energy, light, and form that hovered in the air, wrapped in layers of wings, flame, geometry, and void. It pulsed like being in labor, struggling against its own identity. Sometimes it looked like an angel, sometimes a planet, sometimes a storm of faces. And it saw us. I felt it, not in my body but in my soul, a gaze like the inside of a commandment. It didn't inspect, it didn't analyze, it expected, like a king awaiting loyalty, like a god awaiting worship. Lucien bowed slightly, not to the throne, but to something else. He turned to me and spoke just above a whisper. "This is the throne engine, the crown of the three heavens. Beyond this lies only truth, or ruin." I stared at the distant towers, the drifting sentinels, taller now, slower. Their forms stretched like reflections in warped glass. I saw shapes on the horizon, souls suspended on scaffolds, hammering at something massive and shining. Chains. Even from this distance, I knew them for what they were. Lucien took a breath, the first I'd seen him take in hours. "If you want to come back, this is your last chance. No one will stop you. Most who come this far choose silence." I looked at him. Then they were cowards. Lucien's mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite. "Come then." And together, we stepped into the kingdom. There was no threshold between the gate and the throne realm. No clear border, no line where one world ended and the next began. The transition was more spiritual than spatial, like stepping into a deeper octave of reality. The air wasn't air here. It was a weightless pressure, like the silence in a cathedral before a funeral. Every sound was muffled by reverence. Every step echoed an eternity. The ground beneath our feet was not marble or stone or any mineral I could name. It looked like alabaster at first, but as I stared longer, I saw shifting patterns just beneath its surface. Souls, maybe, or memories. Lucien moved carefully now, not cautious but measured, like a priest walking the edge of blasphemy. I matched his pace out of instinct. The space ahead opened into a vast field of platforms and scaffolding suspended in midair, arranged in circles like sacred crop formations. Souls worked on them, though calling them souls now felt dishonest. As Lucien told me, these were the forgers. Their bodies were humanoid but elongated, stripped of softness. Their arms were built for labor, not embrace. Long, sinewed things that ended in hands of silver and bone. Their faces were voids, flat plains with no mouths, no ears, no features. Only radiant cracks where expressions might have been. They moved with mechanical grace, not the jerky compulsion of the Basin, nor the fervent determination of the loom. but the final rhythm of something that had forgotten choice. Each one knelt before an anvil of light, holding objects that glowed too brightly to see clearly. They weren't making tools. They were shaping something more sacred and more brutal. Chains. Not metaphor, not symbol. Chains. Each link glowing with the shimmer of a captured scream. They pulsed as they were hammered into form, heatless but radiant, each impact of the hammer ringing with a sound I felt in my spine. These weren't chains meant to bind flesh. They were meant to bind power. And above them, wrapped in layer upon layer of those luminous links, drifted the center of this realm. A sphere of light, enormous and silent, spinning slowly at the zenith of the throne realm. It was bound from every direction, each chain anchored to spires that pulsed with prayers written in the language of fire. The light inside the sphere was different from the rest of this place. It didn't shine with the harsh, sterile white of the throne. It flickered. It breathed. It had color. Deep, sorrowful golds, silvers, blues that moved like a grief-given form. I couldn't explain how I knew, but I knew. This was the true God. Lucien stood beside me, watching my face. You feel it, don't you? That ache behind your ribs? That's recognition. Not because you were taught to feel it, because it's real. What is this place? Why is he imprisoned? Lucien closed his eyes. Because long ago he made a mistake. I turned to him, but Lucien wasn't looking at me. He was looking up at the bound light, eyes filled with something between awe and agony. He created. He birthed existence. Not from need, not from design, from love, from longing. But when he looked upon the totality of it, every joy, every cruelty, every war, every sacrifice, he hesitated. Lucien's voice lowered. He questioned himself. And in that hesitation, something else saw an opportunity. The deceiver, I said. Lucien nodded. A being born of his hesitation. A reflection without empathy. A will without doubt. It rose, clothed itself in the language of divinity and claimed the throne. It couldn't unmake what had been made, but it could bind the one who made it. He looked back at me. That's what heaven is. Not a kingdom, not a reward. A containment system. Every level, every chant, every song. It's all maintenance. Every soul that passes through these gates feeds the engine. Each chain is a piece of someone who once dared to hope for more. And the throne? Lucien turned slowly. I followed his gaze. There, at the far edge of the realm, was the throne itself. It floated above a dais, enormous, radiant, horrifying. A twisting monument of impossible angles and wings folded in recursive geometry. It had no face, only faces, layered atop one another, human and inhuman, shifting with each moment. Eyes opened and closed like apertures. Mouths sang and roared and whispered and chanted in 1,000 forgotten tongues. The throne didn't sit. It hovered. It possessed the space the way gravity possesses mass. It wasn't a being. It was an edict. And as I looked upon it, it looked back. I couldn't move. My thoughts weren't my own. I heard voices layered over my internal monologue. Commands, reassurances, expectations, laws. Every sin I'd ever committed was weighed in an instant. Every act of doubt was measured. I felt my name being rewritten in some celestial ledger, the ink wet and final. Don't resist it. It'll scan you. But it can't see you. Not the real you, not yet. How? Because you haven't chosen. And then I saw them, the sentinels. Not the floating orbs of the lower heavens, not the humanoid guardians at the gate. These were the final stage, once souls transformed beyond recognition. They no longer floated, they moved. Tall, spindled figures with elongated limbs and mirrored skins. Their heads orbited by rings of spinning glyphs. They watched everything. They moved in silence, and when a forger faltered, they descended. We saw one fall. A forger raised a hand out of rhythm. The link he shaped was bent slightly wrong, not strong enough. The soul wasted, and a sentinel was there instantly. It touched his shoulder. Just one touched, and the forger collapsed into a heap of smoke. Nothing was said, nothing recorded, and the work continued. Welcome to the throne engine. This is what's left when eternity forgets mercy. We descended a spiral platform suspended by nothing. It turned slowly as we walked, coiling down toward the forges below the throne like a silver tendon through the muscle of a wound. Around us, the air vibrated with soft harmonics, tones I didn't recognize, but that stirred things I hadn't felt since life. The chains were closer now, each link the size of a man's torso, glowed with an inner light so bright it cast no shadow. The amount of power a soul held in these chains was unbelievable. They were beautiful in the way surgical tools are beautiful. Precise, flawless, and built to cut. The forgers knelt at their stations without ceasing, their hammers moving in strict intervals, each impact ringing like the tolling of a bell no one had the courage to answer, soul after soul, one after the other. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each one different in body, but identical in rhythm. Their hammers were shaped like wings, like trumpets, like teeth. I watched as a new link was lifted in the air by invisible hands and floated upward, and spinning slowly toward the bound sphere of light high above. The light inside the sphere pulsed in response. Not in pain, not in protest, but in recognition. Like a caged animal watching the bars close tighter, and there was nothing he could do about it. Lucien stopped beside one of the forging platforms. The forger here was smaller than the others, frailer. His hammer moved with hesitation. His form flickered slightly at the edges, like a bad memory trying to stay coherent. The link he was working on trembled with every strike. He's almost done. With what? With himself. I looked at the glowing chain. Something flickered within it. A face. You said the chains are made from souls. Lucien nodded once. Not just fueled by them, forged from them. A soul that resists is broken down, refined, and reshaped until all that remains is obedience and pain. The strongest become the steel, the rest become the fire. And what happens once the chain is finished? Lucien looked up toward the sphere. It joins the rest, which is holding him. Lucien's silence was the answer. I felt something inside me. I felt like my soul was being ripped apart itself. Somewhere, far away, someone shouted, "Clear!" White exploded through me, but my soul hadn't finished coming apart. I was still there, somewhere between the heavens and the world, halfway unwound by the truth I touched. Lucien was there true, crouched beside the last shape I had taken. His hand reached toward mine. "David, stay, don't let them. We have something very important planned for you. We haven't finished yet. We haven't got the—" "Clear." The light tore through me again. Both worlds this time. My lungs gasped on a table. My soul crackled in the storm. Lucien's fingers touched mine and recoiled. The jolt hit him like divine backlash. His form flickered, lost cohesion, reassembled with a glitch of golden light. His face twisted in agony. But it wasn't pain. It was loss. "David, they're pulling you. Listen to me. You gotta remember. You have to remember this place. Belief is power. Belief and faith in something gives it strength. Remember the power your souls have. I tried to speak. I tried to answer him, but my voice didn't work in 2 worlds. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, Lucien wasn't the guide or the cynic. Not even the rebel. He was just a man. Someone who stayed too long. Clear. The final surge didn't feel like fire. It felt like falling into birth. The heavens around me collapsed inward. The forge, the throne, the basin, the choir, pulled away like scaffolding from a finished monument. The light bled into darkness. Chains recoiled. Prayers snapped. Lucien's voice became a whisper behind glass. I screamed. And the scream filled lungs. Real lungs. The hospital room slammed into focus. Walls, fluorescent lights, masked faces. The sharp scent of alcohol and sweat. The weight of a blanket over a body I hadn't worn in what felt like eternity. My chest convulsed, then rose. I was alive. The shock faded from my muscles, leaving tremors and heat. I blinked hard, focusing through tears. A man stood beside me, jaw slack, tears streaming. My roommate. Holy shit! I came home early. I don't even know why. I just felt like... He couldn't finish. The nurse turned to the doctor. Vitals are stabilizing. He was gone 12 minutes, the doctor whispered, mostly to himself. He shouldn't be here. They all looked at me like I was a miracle. But I knew what I was. I was a message. A memory that couldn't erase. I closed my eyes and saw the chains. The choir, the throne. Lucien's outstretched hand, still flickering somewhere in the unreachable upper dark. And I knew exactly what I had to do. They said I was dead for 12 minutes. Clinically, irreversibly gone. My roommate found me slumped over the floor of the bathroom. He'd come home early for work. He never does that. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something bigger pulling him from home. It doesn't matter. I was already cold when they kicked in the door. They brought me back with 3 shocks. Each one ripped me out of somewhere worse than hell. Not fire, not demons. Just obedience. Sanctified servitude. A machine built on worship and silence. I'm writing this now because I remember everything. And I'm terrified. Not of dying. Of where I'll go when I do. I've seen it. The afterlife. Not the pearly gates and the harps and halos. They sell that image to you to keep you docile. To make you think your suffering earns rest. What's really waiting is a prison shaped like paradise, a kingdom of light that blinds you before it binds you. A voice that doesn't speak. It commands. They call it heaven. It isn't. It's a refinery, a forge, a chain mill. They take your soul, and if you're lucky, they put it to work. You pray, you type, you sing. You become a part of the great celestial engine. If you're unlucky, they break you, melt you, and turn you into something they can use. The chains, the choir, the sentinels, all of it. Every piece made from people who once believed. And at the center of it all, wrapped in the very links of those chains, is something vast and old and sad. Something that remembers what love used to be. A true God. Not a king, not a tyrant. Just a creator who doubted himself. And in that doubt lost everything. I saw him. And I saw what replaced him. A throne with no heart. An algorithm of faith, an echo pretending to be a voice. It wants me back. It'll get me eventually. We all go somewhere, and that place is still up there, counting the minutes. I'm not writing this because I expect you to believe me. I'm writing this because you deserve to be afraid. Because if I forget, even for a second, I might start to think it wasn't real. And the moment I do, I'll stop fighting. If you're reading this and something shifts inside of you, if some part of you knows I'm telling the truth, hold on to that. Don't stop asking questions. Don't stop looking at the light and wondering what it's hiding. Don't pray unless you mean it. Don't serve what you don't understand. And remember that our faith, our belief, gives it power.